Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. The other day when I did my sketchbook snowball video, I mentioned that sometimes sizing goes bad. And a lot of you left a comment saying, how do you know when sizing goes bad? What do you do about it? And can you explain a little bit more about that? So I typed some responses to those questions, but I realized that I should just do a video on it since so many people are obviously curious about this and would want to know what happens when sizing goes bad, why does it go bad, how can we protect our papers, because they are kind of a big investment, and what should we do if we find out that some of our paper, the sizing has gone bad. So basically when you're looking at watercolor paper, and this pertains mostly to watercolor paper because when you're using dry media it doesn't really matter so much. The state of your sizing, it doesn't need to be a heavily sized paper, but sizing is basically a glue that's in your paper. Generally, they add it to your paper when it's being made, when it's just a pulp. They will add something like a gelatin or a cellulose or some sort of synthetic sizing, which is like a glue, to the pulp. And then they form it into the sheets, and then they usually also add a layer of external sizing. So what the sizing does is it keeps your paper from being super absorbent. It makes it so when you draw a line with a pen, the ink doesn't feather. It makes it so when you paint a wash of watercolor, the paint kind of stays on the surface and doesn't completely absorb in and get kind of patchy. It gives you a nice uniform appearance, and it gives your paper a little bit of resiliency, so that when if you do paint a brush stroke, you get the crisp edges. It's going to make the paper stronger. It's just something you want in your paper. Most paper has some sort of sizing in it, like inkjet paper for your printer. That's going to have a sizing in it so that your ink is nice and crisp and it doesn't bleed through to the back. So when your paper sizing breaks down, then you'll notice that your paper will start to be really, really absorbent. You can't spread out the paint very well. You may see darker patches in your wash. You may see speckling in your wash, and it's kind of frustrating when you're working like that. Now, if you've already painted things and you've got sketchbooks just sitting in a stack somewhere, don't worry about those. If they've already been painted, the sizing breaking down isn't going to hurt anything after the paint's applied. But when it happens before you get a chance to paint on the paper, that's where you're going to have issues. Sizing breaking down after your painting's done is not going to do anything to your painting. The paint is there and it's dry and it's good and it's fine. So I have a couple papers that tend to be a little bit more problematic as far as sizing going bad. They would be the cloth bound Arteza watercolor books and also the Strathmore 400 series watercolor paper. For some reason I find these to be much more likely to have the sizing have like a limited life and go bad on me. Now if you find your paper sizing has gone off and it's no longer accepting watercolor very well, what you can do is use it for gouache, you can use it for pastel. You know, you could recoat it with something and paint on it, like maybe you want to prime it with a clear gesso and use it with pastels. Maybe you want to prime it with gouache and use it for pastels. Maybe you just want to use it for gouache. It's going to be fine for gouache and any of those thicker mediums, but anything where you need to add a lot of water or it's very fluid, such as ink or watercolor, that's where you're going to have some issues with the sizing. And if it's like an acrylic ink, it's probably going to be fine. But if it's like a water-based watercolor ink, then you're going to still get that feathering edges and patchy finish and the stuff you don't want. So I'll show you some examples of paintings I did on paper after the sizing has started to break down, and how I kind of fixed it so I could still use the paper. So this one right here, I noticed the sizing was, I'm just going to turn that down a bit. I noticed that the sizing was going because when I was painting it, my paint wouldn't spread, and I was getting a little bit of a rough edge. So I used fine liner to outline things. I used color pencil to add some shine, to smooth things out, and kind of turn it into a mixed media piece. Let's see. You can kind of see in the background wash here on this one, because it was watercolor and color pencil. It's a little bit patchy back there. It's not terrible, but it definitely gave me a little bit of problem when I was working with it. And on this one here in the sky, hopefully this will show up. In the sky here, you can see that speckling, and that would be the sizing starting to break down. So it does happen. Sometimes you'll get a sizing defect on your paper, so the paper doesn't necessarily have sizing. It's not that the sketchbook's old and the sizing has gone bad. You just have a very a book that wasn't sized very uniformly. So I think there's some quality control with this particular sketchbook, this dark patch right there, that's just where the paper wasn't fully sized. So I don't know if it ran out of sizing in the coating process or what, because this was a controlled wash, and then whenever it hit over here, it just got darker. It was applied the exact same way everywhere, but it appeared darker there because the sizing was not consistent. I've got some damaged sizing on another one of these pages here, and it's kind of showing up as like almost like dark scribbles. So, you know, it'll just kind of show up on you, and you can't really tell until you try paint on the paper whether the sizing's gone bad. So, you know, when you put that wash down, you see speckles, the sizing's gone off, and then you have to decide, do I want to keep using this paper for watercolor? Do I want to try it and then maybe add some mixed media to it? Or would I rather just decide I'm going to put a post-it note on this pad and say for gouache and dry media, and then move on to something else. Now, you can buy watercolor sizing, but it's kind of expensive, and I think like the Strathmore 400 series paper is not that expensive. I think if you were to coat it with watercolor sizing, like you had a pad or a block that went bad, I think for the amount that you're paying for the watercolor sizing, you could buy a new block of this paper. So I kind of think that's a false economy. I tried to make my own watercolor size to make like an affordable version of it. I tried using wallpaper size. I tried using different glues thinned down. I tried a bunch of different things, and I couldn't make something that was reliable and that was consistent. So in my opinion, I wouldn't bother resizing the paper unless it's a really expensive paper that you absolutely love and you can't, and it's going to be cheaper to resize it than to rebuy the paper, like maybe if you had arches or something like that. But I also find that that arches doesn't lose its sizing. Now, how long your sizing lasts and how long your watercolor paper will last for you, and this is important if you like to stock up when there's a sale, really depends on how you store the paper and the climate that you live in. In all these cases where my paper has lost its sizing, it has not been stored optimally. And by that I mean that the paper spent a summer in my car because I was using it for all my plein air work, or I was traveling a lot for teaching, and I just left that block in my car, and it was fluctuating with the humidity and with the temperatures, and because I mean it can get down to the 50s at night and be in the 80s in the day, and then can get really humid and can get really dry. I mean, all that fluctuation is not good for your paper, especially humidity fluctuation. So that, and also my sketchbooks stay in my basement, so that's getting some, it doesn't fluctuate that much, but it does fluctuate a bit in temperature. It goes from about 50s in the winter to maybe 70 in the summer, so there is a little bit of fluctuation, and the basement can get kind of damp. I run a dehumidifier, but in the summer it can get a little damp if I forget to run it, and that is putting humidity into the air and humidity into the paper. If you live somewhere that's tropical, your paper is going to last much less because you have so much humidity in the air anyway, and if you don't have means to control that, then your paper is going to suffer. It's just going to absorb. It's a natural product. It's made from natural fibers, and it is going to soak in all that stuff from the environment. So I do have some paper that is quite old. I used to run a in-person teaching school before I had kids, and my oldest is turning 21 this month, so it was purchased quite a while ago, and there was some great deals on Arches paper, and I bought reams of Arches paper back then, and I still have some of that paper, but I keep it upstairs in a big flat file under my bed, and that room stays pretty much 70 degrees all year round, same amount of humidity, and that paper is fine. That paper has had, and I have a lot of paper up there because I stock up when it's on sale, and I pull from those that pile of paper frequently, and I've never run into a sizing issue with any of those sheets there. But you're keeping a constant humidity and a constant temperature, and that's what your paper loves. If you're comfortable in a space, your paper is going to be happy there too. But if the temperatures and humidity swing a lot, like maybe you keep your art supplies or your extra backstock of supplies in the garage, and your garage gets, you know, near 100 degrees in the summer, and then it gets 40 degrees in the winter, your paper's not going to like that. Your paper needs to be well ventilated, it needs low humidity, and it needs that stability of environment to keep it from kind of breaking down. So I would say if you live someplace tropical, if you don't have a place to store your products where where you can keep the environment kind of stable, then don't stock up on it, because any money you save from buying it on sale, you're going to lose if you can't use that paper, right? If you just have to chuck it. Luckily, I work in a bunch of different mediums, so I've been using my old Strathmore 400 for gouache, and it works great, or I can gesso it and use it for pastel, and it works great. I'm not resizing paper because I don't think I have plenty of paper also, so I'm kind of in a fortunate situation, but it also would cost more to resize it than just to rebuy the paper. So that's why I don't personally recommend doing that. But I mean, hey, if you live someplace where the paper is really expensive and the sizing's not very expensive, then obviously you can do that. And the YouTube channel Parka Blogs, Tio, has done a video on resizing paper because he lives in Singapore where it's very humid and your paper can and your sketchbooks can be compromised pretty easily there. So check that out. I will try to find that video and link it in the video description so you can find it. And that way, if you do want to go that route, you can, but it's not personally something I recommend. I think it's kind of a false economy for me anyway, because the paper is cheap enough to rebuy versus it'd be more expensive and the time and whatnot to resize it. Plus, I just use it for something else. But if you only use watercolor, then it might be an option. It might be something you want to have on hand just for that. For that situation. But so if you're wondering if your paper's gone bad, wherever you stored it, put a wash of watercolor down. Do you see speckles? Do you see feathered edges instead of nice crisp lines? Are you seeing a patchy look in your wash? If you see any of those three things, probably your sizing has gone bad and the paper's not going to be very reliable. So go ahead and experiment with it. Use it for mixed media, use it for gouache, use it for something that doesn't require such a precise balance on the surface. And hey, I guess you know what? The good thing is that then it's not so precious and you can afford to experiment with it and just be free with it. And store your papers at a nice, stable environment if you can. Like I said, I'm not perfect. The room of hoard is not heated. It is my basement. It fluctuates a bit. It's not too bad, but yeah, I would not store my full sheet Arches paper or anything too expensive in there for paper-wise just because of that. And I hope that answered all your questions that you had about sizing. If I left something out, please feel free to leave a comment or a question in the comments down below, and I will answer it. But I think I covered it. I think I covered the watercolor paper sizing issue in this video, and I hope you found it useful. And till next time, happy crafting. Use your stuff up. The only products that are wasted, the only way to waste an art material is by not using it. So don't let your paint dry up in the tube. Don't let your paper rot on the shelf. Get it down, use it up, have fun. That's what you bought it for. And making art is good. It's never a waste. So with that, we'll see you next time. Happy crafting. Bye.